On July 15th, 1867, Benito Juárez rode into Mexico City after years of war and exile, reclaiming the capital and restoring the Mexican Republic. That moment is now captured on one of Mexico's most widely used banknotes, the 500 peso note. So what exactly is this piece of currency telling us? Hi everyone, and welcome back to What's on Your Money, the podcast where we uncover the hidden stories stamped, printed, and tucked into currencies both past and present. I'm Simone, and each episode I'll guide you through the fascinating stories that your money can tell. Okay, so the banknote that we're looking at today is the 500 peso note from Mexico. At the time of recording, 500 pesos is roughly $39 Canadian. Basically, an inexpensive restaurant meal costs 200 pesos, and this would leave you with enough for a fast food combo and a domestic beer afterwards. This banknote was issued by the Bank of Mexico on August 27, 2018, as part of the circulating G series. The G series theme is historical identity paired with natural heritage. This is according to the Bank of Mexico website. The main color of this note is blue. It's made from cotton paper and it's in landscape format. On the front sits President Benito Juárez, and beside him is his entrance into Mexico City on July 15, 1867. Flip it over and you can see the coastline and sea ecosystems of El Vizcaino Biosphere Reserve in Baja California. And in the center of that is a gray whale and her calf. This note replaces the previous 500 that had Diego Rivera on the front and Frida Kahlo on the back. Benito Juárez has been on Mexican currency since 1984, when he first appeared on the 50 peso coin under the old peso system, and then again when Mexico revalued its currency in 1993, where 1,000 old pesos became one new peso. Juárez would make this transition too, appearing on the new 20 peso note. He has held various denominations over the decades, and today he anchors the 500 peso note, which is the second highest denomination in circulation. So this isn't Mexico discovering Juárez. This is a country that's been putting the same face on its money for over 40 years. Through a currency reform, through changing governments, through everything. And that consistency is its own kind of statement. Out of every person and every symbol Mexico could have chosen, they continue to choose Juárez. Born March 21, 1806 in San Pablo Galatillo, Oaxaca, New Spain at the time, but now is part of Mexico, Benito Pablo Juárez Garcia was born to Brigida Garcia and Marcielo Juárez, indigenous farmers belonging to the Zapotec people. Both passed away when he was 3 years old, leaving him and his two sisters, Josefia and Rosa, behind. They were taken in by their uncle Bernardino Juárez, who lived in the Zapotec mountain village with them. This is where he would grow up speaking the Zapotec language. At 12 years old, he left his uncle's home and walked 41 miles to Oaxaca City to join his sister who had left before him. Since he only spoke Zapotec and not Spanish, he would have been considered illiterate at this time. Not long after, he came under the mentorship of Antonia Salanueve, a bookbinder and a tertiary of the Franciscan order. The Franciscan order is a Catholic group known for living simply and serving among the poor. It was Salanueve who taught Juárez to read and encouraged him to pursue an education. Years later, Juárez would say, "Education is the fundamental part of social happiness. It is the principle on which liberty rests." In spring of 1821, he enrolled in Santa Cruz Seminary, studying Latin, philosophy, and theology. Just a few months later, in September of that same year, Mexico gained its independence. Juárez was only 15. He would go on to spend 6 years at the seminary, working towards becoming a priest, before leaving in 1827, having changed his mind. Between 1829 and 1831, he studied law and science, receiving his law degree from the Oaxaca Institute of Arts and Science, later renamed in his honor to Benito Juárez Autonomous University of Oaxaca. He passed the bar on January 13, 1834, and began doing pro bono work for the indigenous community. He entered politics during the rule of dictator Santa Anna, and his background, the poverty, the indigenous roots, the church mentorship he would eventually walk away from, would all shape his political views deeply, including his belief in the separation of church and state. He served on the Oaxaca City Council from 1831 to 1833, his first elected seat. Then he served as a local congressman from 1833, becoming a civil judge in 1841. In 1843, his love life flourished. He married Margarita Meza, daughter of one of the wealthiest families in Mexico, and notably, the adoptive daughter of Antonio Meza, his sister's former employer. They would go on to have 11 children together. And one thing that surprised me while I was researching is that Benito Juárez was also a Freemason. He was initiated in 1847 into La Logia Independencia, No. 2, of the Mexican National Rite, another institution that also now bears his name. He received the 9th degree in 1854 and the 33rd in 1862. And the Masonic name he chose for himself? Guillermo Tell, or William Tell. Most people know William Tell as the man who shot an apple off his son's head in defiance of a tyrannical ruler. Whether history or myth, he became a symbol of resistance and independence. Juárez knew exactly what that name meant, and he chose it for himself. That tells you a lot about who he was and what he believed in. And you can see why a man who named himself after a symbol of resistance would go on to do what he did. During this same period, a war broke out between Mexico and America in 1846, and in 1847, Juárez was called to serve as interim governor of Oaxaca, eventually getting formally elected and serving until 1852. As governor, he made education a priority, building 50 rural schools and actively encouraging girls to attend. He cut the bloated state government, revived an abandoned Pacific port, and got the state actually making regular payments on its debt. Real, tangible progress for the people. But there was some unfinished business. Ex-President Santa Anna had been exiled to Jamaica after the war with America ended, and from what I understand, he may have asked Juárez for asylum in Oaxaca, and Juárez said no. People questioned him for it, and Santa Anna did not forget. When the conservative government came back into power, Santa Anna returned to Mexico, and he returned the favor. First, he placed Juárez under house arrest for several months, and then exiled him to New Orleans, where he worked rolling cigars. It was during this time in exile that Juárez is said to have started developing more revolutionary ideas, guided by 19th century European liberal thought. He also connected with a group of young idealistic Mexicans who called themselves the Puros, committed to building a truly equitable society. Juárez was eventually smuggled back into Mexico to assist Juan Alvarez, who was leading the Ajutla rebellion. By autumn of 1854, they had pushed Santa Anna out of power for good. So all of that was setting the scene. With the Liberals now forming the new government in November of that same year, Juárez was named Secretary of Justice under Juan Alvarez. And with the Liberal Party in power, the Puros turned their focus to the Roman Catholic Church. What followed were the reform laws. Ley Juárez, or Juárez's Law, came into effect on November 23, 1855. It abolished special court systems for the military and clergy when it came to civil matters, ensuring that no one could use a church or military court to sidestep the rights of the civilian. Then came the Ley de Law in 1856, which ordered the sale of church properties not actively being used for religious purposes, also along with the land held by indigenous communities that was not being actively used. The idea behind this was that by breaking up these large corporate land holdings, this would allow the middle class to actually afford property again. Churches and religious buildings could remain, but everything else had to be sold at auction, with the money going to the federal government. In the first 6 months alone, 23 million pesos worth of property was auctioned off. 20 million of that was belonging to the church. To put that into perspective, that's hundreds of millions of dollars in today's terms. In 1857, a new constitution incorporated these reform laws, and it was Mexico's first Bill of Rights. It abolished slavery and titles of nobility, and introduced a single legislative house voting together to pass laws. The conservatives, especially the church, pushed back hard. Priests were publicly suspended if they didn't take a stance against the Constitution, and on the other hand, bureaucrats lost their jobs if they didn't swear an oath of allegiance to it. And soldiers who did take the oath were turned away from Catholic hospitals and denied their last rites. That resistance would eventually boil over into a civil war, the Reform War. Ignacio Comonfort was elected president from the Liberal Party in 1857. Juárez was elected Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. In January of 1858, conservatives revolted against Comonfort, and under the Constitution, that made Juárez president. Juárez fled Mexico City for the port of Veracruz, and from there he governed, funded by the customs revenue coming through the port. The war finally ended when the United States stepped in and backed Juárez as a legitimate president, and the liberals retook Mexico City in 1861. Now in office during peacetime for the first time, Juárez faced a country drowning in debt. He suspended all foreign debt payments for 2 years, England, Spain, and France among them. They responded by jointly seizing Mexico's ports, which include Veracruz. But Napoleon III had bigger plans. With America distracted by its own civil war at the time, he saw an opening to expand his empire just like his uncle before him, and he ordered forces to march on Mexico City. However, once this happened, England and Spain went back home. By the time the French had actually reached Mexico City, Juárez was already gone, constantly moving from city to city, staying one step ahead. Napoleon III then convinced Archdukes Ferdinand and Maximilian of Austria to come and serve as Emperor of Mexico, being backed by French military power. The conservatives and the church, having lost the Reform War, welcomed him with open arms, hoping to restore a Catholic monarch. Maximilian would arrive in 1864. However, it didn't last. Facing the resistance of the Mexican people and the pressure from the United States to get out, France eventually withdrew in the first half of 1867. Now, without his French backing, Maximilian was captured, and then promptly executed on June 19, 1867. Benito Juárez made his triumphant return into Mexico City on July 15, 1867. This is the moment captured on this banknote. Back in the capital, he was re-elected in 1867, and then again in 1871. This period became known as the Restoration of the Republic. For the first time, Juárez could govern without a war on. He connected rural communities across Mexico with telegraph lines, and then built a railway to link the country further. Real infrastructure, real lasting change. Even during this relatively peaceful stretch, he faced opposition, including from Porfirio Diaz, who once had been one of his loyal supporters. Diaz would eventually go on to run his own dictatorship down the line. On June 18, 1872, Benito Juárez died of a heart attack while still in office, still working. He is buried in the Pantheon of San Fernando in Mexico City. He is the only Mexican president ever honored with the title of Hero of the Americas. He was the first and only full-blooded indigenous president in Mexico's history. Juárez left behind words that still echo today. Among individuals, as among nations, respect for the rights of others is peace. And that idea, that laws and protections can shape the future of a nation, brings us to the other half of this banknote. On the back, we have a mother gray whale and her calf swimming in El Vizcaino Biosphere Reserve, located in Baja California Sur. Established in 1992, this reserve was instrumental in the recovery of the eastern Pacific gray whale. Baja California Sur is in northwestern Mexico, the southern half of the Baja California Peninsula. Think of the U.S. state of California, then keep going south along that same peninsula. In the central part of this peninsula, towards the north of the state, are the coastal lagoons of Hoyo de Libra and San Ignacio. Gray whales, harbor seals, and California sea lions all use these lagoons to reproduce and shelter through the winter. The surrounding land is a mix of marshes, dunes, wetlands, and mangroves. This protected area covers more than 2.5 million hectares, with the lagoons making up about 14% of this area, making it the largest protected area in all of Mexico. So why did the sanctuary need to exist in the first place? These lagoons have long been home to the eastern Pacific gray whales, with a population estimated close to 100,000 before whaling began in the late 18th and early 19th century. Whalers from Europe and the United States set up fisheries along the coast of California and Baja California, hunting gray whales for their blubber, which was rendered into oil for lamps. Whale oil burned cleaner and brighter than alternatives, with the only complaint being that gray whale oil had a bit of a fishy smell. Gray whales migrate close to the shore, and in 1855 a whaling captain named Charles Melville Scammon discovered Ojo de Libre Lagoon. He established a fishery here where whales could be hunted from small boats. And remember, these are the same lagoons where mothers come to give birth and nurse their calves for around 7 months, making them very easy to approach. However, the whalers would also call them devilfish for how they reacted when they harpooned, but honestly, what else are they supposed to do? With new gun-loaded harpoons and faster steamships, hunting peaked in the mid-1800s, and by the 1890s, gray whales had been hunted to near extinction. And then humans went back for a second round in the 1920s through the 1940s. The population had partially recovered before this, but then it was pushed to near extinction again. Whalers would often target pregnant and nursing mothers, as they were easier targets. However, they would leave the calves to die without them. By this point, Mexico had also started to adopt the gray whales as a national symbol, calling them Mexicans by birth. In 1931, the Geneva Convention for the Regulation of Whaling was established, signed by 26 countries, including Mexico. But it didn't do much in practice. It was superseded by the International Whaling Commission in 1946, which Mexico later joined in 1949. What did make a difference was the collapse of the whaling industry itself. Costs rose, alternative fuels took over, and it simply stopped being economically viable. In 1972, Lagoon Ojo de Libre was declared a whale refuge by presidential decree, with Lagoon San Ignacio following in 1979. UNESCO granted it Man and Biosphere Reserve status in 1988, and it became a World Heritage Site in 1993. Today, whale watching has become an economic backbone for the local community. When rock lobster fishing is closed for the season, local fishermen take visitors out on their pangas to see the whales. Around 13 million people visit every year, bringing in $2.1 billion in revenue. There are real benefits, economic and educational, though it's worth noting that improper practices can still cause harm. So why do we think they got paired together on this note? The G-series pairs a historical era with a major ecosystem. Juárez represents the reform and the restoration period. And on the flip side, Elvin Cancino and the mother and the calf. It's really not hard to see the connection. The whales went through their own restoration, their population recovering once laws were put in place to stop commercial hunting. Both stories are about survival, resilience, and what becomes possible when the right protections finally exist. The more I sat with it, the more the parallels kept coming. Juárez was forced out of Mexico City twice, and the gray whales were hunted to near extinction twice. The whale's annual migration almost echoes Juárez's own journey, the 12-year-old boy walking to Oaxaca City, and later the triumphant return captured on the front of the note. They're called devilfish because they fought back, and so did Juárez. And if there's a takeaway from any of this, it's that a bad situation doesn't have to be the end of the story. You can always try to rebuild. So it's time for Have, Want, or Need, where I share whether this note is one I have, want, or need in my collection. This is definitely a piece that I'd want in my collection. Before researching this, I had no idea how much these lagoons contributed to the recovery of the gray whale. That genuinely surprised me. And honestly, it made me want to go. To be out on the water, near the whales, in those lagoons. That's not something I expected a banknote to do to me. One detail about this note that I think is worth a closer look. If you hold this note under the black light, the whale scene comes to life. It's like watching a trippy underwater beach scene, to be honest. Sometimes the most meaningful stories are hiding in plain sight, passed between hands every day on a banknote nobody stops to think about. Anyways, let me know what you think about this story. Do you have, want, or need this note? And what might be noteworthy to you? You've been listening to What's on Your Money. I'm Simone, and this is just one of the many stories that live on the coins and notes we carry every day. I'll be back soon with another story. Until then, don't just spend your money, read it.